Good evening, dear travelers, and welcome back to Snug as a Bug. I am Atticus, your guide for tonight's journey through the ancient Greek world of myths and legends. Settle into the comfort of your bed. Let your body sink into the softness beneath you and gently release the weight of the day with a slow, deep breath in and out. You are safe, calm, and ready to embark on a journey through time. Tonight, we explore the captivating tales of ancient Greece, where gods and mortals walk together, and where the stars above hold stories as old as the earth itself. We will begin with the birth of Athena, where wisdom emerges from the very mind of Zeus, followed by the heroic labors of Heracles, as he faces trials beyond mortal endurance. Next, you will be carried by the music of Orpheus, as he ventures into the underworld in the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice, before witnessing the immense power of the king of gods in the Wrath of Zeus. Finally, sail with Jason and the Argonauts on the perilous quest for the Golden Fleece. Let these ancient myths guide you gently into peace and rest, as their timeless stories carry you deeper into a place of serenity. Before we immerse ourselves in the legendary tales of gods and heroes, let's take a moment to fully relax and unwind. Gently close your eyes and allow your body to settle, feeling the soft embrace of your bed beneath you. Take a long, slow inhale, and then a deep exhale, releasing any lingering tension with your breath. With each cycle of breath, your body grows lighter, your mind becomes still, and your heart beats in a calm, steady rhythm. Imagine now that you are standing on a quiet hill at dusk, overlooking the rolling fields of ancient Greece. The warm breeze carries the scent of olive trees, and the distant murmur of the sea echoes faintly in the background. Above you, the night sky stretches wide, a canvas of deep indigo dotted with shimmering stars. Each star holds a story, a tale whispered by the gods themselves, waiting to be heard. Feel the soft grass beneath your feet, cool and comforting, as you look out over the horizon. The sky is bathed in the golden glow of twilight, and the world around you is still, peaceful, and timeless. The air is filled with a sense of magic, as though the very land is alive with ancient energy. As you stand here, allow yourself to become one with this ancient world. Feel the gentle pulse of the earth beneath you, steady and eternal. You are safe, cradled by the calm of the night and the deep history that surrounds you. Now, as you breathe deeply, feel yourself being drawn into the world of myth. The stories are waiting to unfold, to carry you on a journey through the realms of gods and mortals, of heroes and legends. You are ready to begin, ready to hear the tales that have echoed through time. Let go of the world around you and allow these ancient myths to carry you into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Birth of Athena, Chapter 1. The Tension of Olympus. In the heart of Olympus, where the clouds rested like delicate blankets over the peaks, the gods stirred restlessly in their eternal paradise. Olympus was a world untouched by time, its rivers running with the clearest waters, its groves filled with the whispering of ancient oaks, and its golden halls glowing beneath the eternal sun. Yet, despite the beauty of this divine domain, a sense of unease had settled like a fog over the gods. Zeus, the king of the gods, stood at the edge of his palace, staring out into the horizon. His strong frame, normally filled with the energy of command and power, seemed to sag under an invisible weight. The winds, usually calm and gentle on Olympus, now carried with them a subtle disquiet, as though even nature itself sensed the disturbance brewing within the divine realm. Zeus's sharp blue eyes scanned the skies, but his mind was elsewhere. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the depths of his being, like a shadow creeping ever closer. It wasn't an enemy approaching the gates of Olympus, no army of titans, no rebellion from within. No, this was something far more intimate and unnerving, a force that resided within himself. He had felt this way only once before during the war against the Titans, when he had seized control of the cosmos. Then, as now, he had known that the fates were weaving something significant into the tapestry of time. The prophecy, the ancient words whispered by the fates, the Moirai, haunted his thoughts. They had foretold of a child born from his own flesh, a child who would not overthrow him but would possess a power unlike any other. Wisdom that could surpass even his mighty thunderbolt. Zeus had heard many prophecies in his time, and not all had come to pass, but the words of the fates were never to be taken lightly. In the cool shadows of the golden pillars that lined the palace halls, Hera watched Zeus from afar. Her eyes, dark and calculating, followed his every movement. She was no stranger to his troubles. As queen of the gods, Hera had long been aware of the pressures Zeus faced, though she rarely showed sympathy. She had fought her battles alongside him, ruling over the cosmos and ensuring the balance of power remained in their favor. But now, something felt different. Hera's lips pressed into a thin line as she thought back to the many indiscretions of her husband, his countless affairs with mortal women, nymphs, and even goddesses. Every new child born to Zeus carried with it the potential for disruption, and Hera had long feared the day when one of his offspring might rise to challenge them. But this was no mere affair, no scandalous love child. This was something more profound, something born from the very essence of Zeus's divine power. As the goddesses of Olympus gathered in the gardens, their voices soft and filled with the music of laughter, Hera remained silent, her thoughts turning over the possibilities. Could this child be the one to fulfill the prophecy? What did it mean for her place as queen if a new power emerged, a power born not of passion or lust, but of wisdom? Beyond the palace, in the sacred groves and hidden temples, the whispers of the gods grew louder. Poseidon, the lord of the seas, felt the unease ripple through the waters of the oceans far below. In the depths of Tartarus, Hades, the ruler of the underworld, sensed a shift in the balance of life and death. Even the goddesses who tended to the hearth and home, like Hestia, could feel the disturbance in the cosmic order. But for all their whispers and glances, none could truly know the depth of Zeus's concern. Only he knew the full extent of the prophecy, and only he carried the burden of what was to come. Standing alone atop the highest balcony of Olympus, he clenched his fists, trying to push away the thoughts of what might soon emerge. But the unease remained, like a splinter lodged deep within his mind. As the hours passed, Zeus found no solace. The sunlight, which bathed the divine city in warmth and golden light, seemed too bright, too sharp. The colors of the gardens, once so vivid and comforting, felt overwhelming. His senses were heightened, each breath a reminder of the tension coiling tighter within him. And then, as if the very heavens sensed his distress, the first twinge of pain lanced through his skull. It was sharp but brief, like a sudden gust of wind that disappears before one can register it fully. Zeus winced, but said nothing, shaking his head to clear the sensation. He had known battles that raged for centuries, had borne the weight of the cosmos on his shoulders, and had wielded the thunderbolt against countless foes. This was nothing, he told himself, yet deep down, Zeus knew it was only the beginning. Chapter 2. Zeus's Dreadful Pain. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows over Olympus, Zeus retreated to the inner sanctum of his palace. It was a place of solitude, a vast hall lined with towering columns that reached toward the sky. Here, in the quietest corner of Olympus, he hoped to find peace, to escape the nagging sense of foreboding that gnawed at his mind. But the pain returned, stronger this time, and it pulsed with a rhythm that matched the beating of his heart. Zeus clenched his jaw, his hands instinctively gripping the arms of his throne. The ache was no longer a mere inconvenience. It had grown into something far more sinister, a relentless pressure that seemed to spread like wildfire across his temples. Hera, ever watchful, noticed the strain in Zeus's posture. She approached him cautiously, her footsteps barely audible on the marble floor. "Zeus," she said, her voice low but edged with concern, "what is happening? You have been distant for days." Zeus waved her off, unwilling to admit the depth of his discomfort. "It is nothing, Hera, a mere headache." But even as he spoke, the pain surged again, this time with a force that made him gasp. Zeus, the unshakable ruler of Olympus, felt his vision blur momentarily. It was as if something within him was clawing its way out, demanding to be released. Hera's eyes narrowed. She had seen Zeus face titans, monsters, and rebellions without flinching, yet now he seemed vulnerable, almost human in his suffering. "It is not nothing," Hera insisted, stepping closer. This is something more." Zeus closed his eyes, trying to block out the world around him. He focused on the rhythmic pounding in his skull, the way it ebbed and flowed like the tide. With each wave of pain he felt something else, something stirring beneath the surface, a presence that was both foreign and familiar. He could no longer deny it. This was the prophecy unfolding. This was the child. For centuries, Zeus had ruled with unmatched power, his reign unchallenged. But now he was faced with something he could not control. The fates had woven their threads long ago, and now those threads were tightening around him. In the farthest corner of the hall, a flicker of firelight appeared, accompanied by the soft clanging of metal on metal. Hephaestus, the god of the forge, had arrived. His muscular form, scarred and soot-covered from his work in the depths of Olympus, moved with surprising grace as he approached his father. "I was summoned," Hephaestus said, his voice gruff but respectful. His sharp eyes flicked to Zeus, and he immediately noticed the strain etched into his father's features. "Yes," Zeus replied, his voice tight with pain. "I need your help, Hephaestus. There is something inside me, something that must be released." Hephaestus studied Zeus for a moment, his mind already turning over the possibilities. As the god of fire and craftsmanship, he had seen the creation of many things, both beautiful and terrible. He had forged the weapons of the gods, crafted armor that could withstand the might of titans, and yet this was something new, something that required more than mere skill with a hammer. Zeus's pain was now unbearable. His body trembled, his breath coming in short, labored gasps. The other gods, sensing the growing tension, began to gather outside the hall, their whispers filling the air like the rustling of leaves in a storm. "Hephaestus!" Zeus groaned, his voice thick with desperation. "I can bear it no longer." Hephaestus nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He knew that whatever was inside Zeus had to be freed. If not, The consequences could be catastrophic. With a swift motion, he called forth his hammer, its surface gleaming with a molten glow. The hammer of Hephaestus was no ordinary tool. Forged in the heart of Olympus, it had the power to shape not only metal, but also the very fabric of the divine. It had been used to craft weapons that could cut through time itself, and shields that could repel the darkest of curses. And now it would be used to release whatever was trapped within Zeus. The gods, now gathered at the entrance of the hall, watched in breathless silence. Even Ares, the god of war, stood still, his usual bravado replaced by a deep sense of unease. They could all feel it, the power building within Zeus, the air crackling with energy. Hephaestus raised the hammer high above his head, his muscles tensing as he prepared to strike. The room was filled with a deafening silence, the tension so thick it seemed to choke the very breath from the gods. And then, with one swift motion, Hephaestus brought the hammer down. Chapter 3: The Birth of the Goddess. The sound of Hephaestus's hammer striking Zeus's head echoed through Olympus like the thunderclap before a storm. The impact was swift, powerful, yet controlled. As if Hephaestus had calculated every ounce of force necessary to free what was trapped within the king of gods. In that instant, time seemed to slow. The air around Zeus shimmered with a golden light, and for a brief moment, the gods could only watch in awe as the light intensified, expanding outward in a burst of energy that filled the hall with warmth and brilliance. It was not the harsh, blinding light of the sun, but rather a soft, radiant glow, like the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon after a long, dark night. And from that light, she emerged, Athena, fully grown, fully armored, and fully divine. Her form rose gracefully from the cleft in Zeus's head, as if she had always been there, waiting patiently for the right moment to appear. Her armor, gleaming silver and gold, caught the light and reflected it in dazzling patterns across the marble floors. A long, flowing cloak of white trailed behind her, rippling softly as she stepped forward into the hall. In one hand she held a spear, its tip sharp and gleaming with an ethereal glow. In the other she carried a shield, emblazoned with intricate designs that told stories of battles won and wisdom gained. Her eyes, deep and clear, were filled with both strength and serenity, as if she held the knowledge of the universe within her gaze. The gods stared in silent reverence. None dared to speak, for they knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that had never been seen before and would never be seen again. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, had been born. Zeus, still reeling from the release of the energy within him, slowly rose from his throne. His head no longer pounded with pain, but he felt a strange sense of emptiness where Athena had once been. Yet, as he looked upon his daughter, he knew that she was not a loss, but a gift, a manifestation of his own power, his own wisdom, made flesh. "Athena," he said, his voice steady but filled with awe, "you are my child, born of my mind and soul. You are a force unlike any other, a goddess of wisdom, of war, of strategy and reason." Athena stepped forward, her gaze meeting her father's. Though she was newly born, there was an ancientness to her, a timelessness that spoke of knowledge far beyond her years. "I am Athena," she said, her voice calm and assured, like the gentle whisper of a breeze through the olive trees. "I am born of wisdom, destined to guide both gods and mortals in the ways of reason and strength." Her words echoed through the hall, and as they did, The gods began to stir. Slowly, one by one, they bowed before her, acknowledging her as their equal, their sister, their divine guide. Even Ares, the god of war, who had long prided himself on his unmatched prowess in battle, felt a sense of awe as he looked upon Athena. There was something in her presence, something that commanded not just respect, but reverence. She was not a warrior driven by rage or bloodlust, but by strategy, by intellect, by the wisdom to know when to fight and when to hold back. As the light surrounding Athena began to fade, she turned her gaze toward the world below, toward the mortals who walked the earth, unaware of the divine drama unfolding above them. She could feel their struggles, their desires, their need for guidance, and she knew that her role among the gods was not just to rule, but to teach, to lead, to bring wisdom to a world that so desperately needed it. Chapter 4. Athena's First Breath. The moment of Athena's birth was a turning point not only for the gods, but for the cosmos itself. Her presence, though new, carried with it an air of inevitability, as if the universe had always been waiting for her to emerge from the mind of Zeus. As the light around her faded, Athena stood tall and serene, surveying the halls of Olympus with calm detachment. She did not rush forward to claim her place, nor did she revel in the astonished gazes of her fellow gods. Instead, she simply breathed, slow, deliberate breaths that seemed to steady the very air around her. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, moved across the faces of the gods, who now regarded her with a mixture of awe and respect. There was Hera, her stepmother, who watched with an expression that was unreadable. Was it pride? Jealousy? Perhaps a little of both. Poseidon, lord of the seas, stood nearby, his trident in hand, his gaze contemplative as if weighing the implications of Athena's arrival. And then there was Ares, the god of war, who looked at her with barely concealed curiosity, perhaps even a hint of challenge in his eyes. But Athena paid them little mind. Her focus was not on proving herself, for she needed no validation. She was born fully realized, with knowledge and power already flowing through her veins. What mattered to her now was understanding her role in this divine order, where she fit, what she would bring to the world of gods and men. Zeus, still regaining his strength after the ordeal of her birth, approached her. His usual air of dominance was softened, replaced by a kind of paternal pride. Athena regarded him with the same calm detachment she had shown to the other gods, but there was an undeniable bond between them. She was, after all, his creation, born not of flesh, but of thought, of divine intellect. "Father," she said, her voice as steady as her gaze, "I understand my place now." Zeus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And what place is that, my daughter?" Athena's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, though it held no arrogance, only certainty. "I am the goddess of wisdom and war, but my war is not fought with brute force alone. It is a war of strategy, of intellect, of reason. I will guide both gods and mortals, not with the sword, but with the mind." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Zeus found himself nodding once more, impressed by her clarity of purpose. It was true. Athena was unlike any other god. She was born not of desire or ambition, but of thought, of wisdom distilled into its purest form. "And what of the world below?" Zeus asked, gesturing to the earth far beneath them. "What will you bring to the mortals who look to us for guidance?" Athena's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the clouds parted to reveal the mortal realm. From her vantage point, she could see the cities of men, their temples, their homes, their fields of wheat swaying gently in the breeze. She could feel their struggles, their hopes, their fears. Mortals were fragile, fleeting creatures, but they were also capable of great things if given the right guidance. "I will bring them wisdom," Athena said softly. "I will teach them the value of knowledge, of strategy, of peace over conflict. I will show them that true strength lies not in the sword, but in the mind that wields it." Zeus watched her closely, sensing the depth of her conviction. "And war? Will you lead them in battle as well?" Athena turned to him, her expression unchanging. "Yes, but I will lead them with wisdom. I will teach them to fight not out of hatred or greed, but out of necessity. War should be the last resort, not the first." Her word struck a chord with Zeus. He had waged countless battles in his time, many of them fueled by anger, pride, or a desire to maintain his rule. But Athena's approach was different. She saw war as a tool to be used sparingly, only when all other options had been exhausted. "Very well," Zeus said at last, his voice filled with approval. "You are indeed my daughter, Athena, and you will be a great goddess, both to the gods and to the mortals below." Athena bowed her head in acknowledgement, though there was no sense of submission in the gesture. She was equal to her father now, her place among the gods secure. As Zeus turned to address the other gods, who had been watching the exchange in silence, Athena remained where she stood, her gaze once again focused on the world below. She could already feel the pull of her destiny, the weight of the wisdom she would bring to both Olympus and the earth. And though she had only just taken her first breath, Athena knew that her journey was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Wisdom of Athena. It wasn't long before Athena's wisdom was put to the test. The gods of Olympus, for all their grandeur and power, were a quarrelsome bunch. Their divine immortality did little to temper their egos, and disputes often flared up over matters that, to a mortal eye, might seem trivial. Yet, to the gods, these quarrels were serious, and the outcomes often had far-reaching consequences. On this particular day, the quarrel was between Ares, the god of war, and Hera, the queen of the gods. Their voices rang out through the halls of Olympus, echoing off the marble walls and filling the air with tension. "You meddle in things you do not understand!" Ares roared, his eyes blazing with fury. "War is my domain, not yours!" Hera, ever poised and regal, did not back down. "I meddle where I must, Ares. You would have the mortals destroy themselves with your endless thirst for bloodshed. Someone must bring reason to your madness." The argument had drawn the attention of the other gods, who now stood at the edges of the hall, watching with interest. It was not uncommon for Ares to clash with the other gods. His temper was legendary, and his love for conflict often put him at odds with those who preferred peace. But this time, the tension seemed different, more charged. Athena, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward. Her presence immediately commanded the attention of the room, though she made no effort to impose herself. She moved with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the heated emotions swirling around her. "Ares," she said, her voice steady and measured, "Hera is not your enemy. She seeks only to temper your actions with reason, as any ruler should." Ares turned to her, his expression darkening. "And what would you know of war, Athena? You who have just taken your first steps in Olympus?" Athena met his gaze without flinching, There was no anger in her eyes, no trace of the fire that burned within Ares. Instead, there was only calm certainty. "I know that war, when waged without wisdom, leads only to destruction," she said. "Strength without strategy is nothing more than brute force, and brute force without purpose is chaos." Ares' scowl deepened, but he said nothing, unable to find a retort. Athena's words, though spoken softly, carried a weight that silenced the room. Hera, sensing an opportunity to de-escalate the situation, spoke up. "Athena is right, Ares. We are not here to destroy the mortals, but to guide them. War has its place, but so does peace." Ares gritted his teeth, his pride clearly wounded, but even he could not deny the truth of their words. With a frustrated grunt, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the hall, leaving behind a silence that was almost palpable. Athena watched him go, her expression unreadable. She knew that Ares' anger was not truly directed at her or Hera. It was born of his own frustration, his own inability to see beyond the immediate satisfaction of battle. But that was the nature of Ares. He was a god of war, and his mind was attuned to conflict. The other gods, who had been watching the exchange with keen interest, began to murmur among themselves. Athena's wisdom had not only diffused a potentially explosive situation, but had also revealed her as a force to be reckoned with, a goddess who could stand her ground even against the fiery temper of Ares. Zeus, who had been watching from his throne, smiled with approval. "Athena speaks wisely," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Let us heed her counsel." And so the quarrel ended, not with violence or force, but with the wisdom of a goddess who understood the value of reason over rage. Chapter 6. Athena's Gifts to Mankind. Athena's wisdom was not limited to the gods alone. She looked upon the world of mortals with a deep sense of responsibility, for she understood that her role was not just to guide the divine, but also to bring enlightenment to those who walked the earth. The mortal realm was a place of great potential, but also great struggle. Humans were fragile beings, prone to fear and ignorance, and their short lives were often filled with hardship. Yet despite their flaws, Athena saw something remarkable in them, a capacity for growth, for learning, for building a better world if given the right guidance. And so Athena descended from Olympus, her feet touching the earth for the first time. She traveled across the land, observing the ways of mortals, their cities, their fields, their daily struggles. She saw the warriors who fought in endless battles, the farmers who toiled under the sun, the artisans who crafted with skill and care. And she saw the leaders, the rulers, who often made decisions driven by fear or greed rather than wisdom. In the great city of Athens, Athena found a people who were eager for knowledge, who valued intellect and innovation. But they lacked a guiding force, a symbol to unite them, to inspire them to greatness. It was here, in the heart of Athens, that Athena decided to bestow her first great gift to mankind. Standing before the people of Athens, her presence commanding yet serene, Athena raised her spear high into the air. With a single deliberate motion, she struck the ground, and from the spot where her spear touched, a tree began to grow. It was an olive tree, its branches spreading wide, its leaves glimmering in the sunlight. The people of Athens watched in awe as the tree took root, its presence both calming and powerful. "This is my gift to you," Athena said, her voice carrying across the city. "The olive tree will bring you peace, prosperity, and wisdom. Its fruit will nourish you, Its oil will light your homes, and its wood will build your cities. But more than that, it will be a symbol of the wisdom that must guide your actions, both in times of peace and in times of conflict. The people, overwhelmed by the goddess's generosity, fell to their knees in gratitude. They named their city in her honor, and the olive tree became a symbol of their bond with Athena, a symbol of the wisdom she had brought to their lives. But Athena's gifts did not end there. She traveled across the land, offering guidance to those who sought it, teaching the value of strategy and intellect over brute force. She showed the people how to build strong cities, how to govern with reason and fairness, and how to resolve conflicts through diplomacy rather than war. Under her guidance, Athens flourished, becoming a beacon of knowledge and culture, a city that valued wisdom above all else. And though the people still faced challenges and hardships, they knew that Athena was watching over them, guiding them with her wisdom and strength. Chapter 7. Athena's Role in War. Though she was the goddess of wisdom, Athena was also a warrior, and her prowess in battle was unmatched. One day, as she stood upon the training grounds of Olympus, watching the gods practice their skills, Ares approached her, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and challenge. "Sister," Ares said, his voice thick with pride, "you speak much of wisdom, but what of battle? Do you fight as well as you think?" Athena turned to him, her expression calm and measured. She could see the challenge in his eyes, the desire to prove himself once more as the god of war. But Athena did not need to prove anything. She knew her strength, and she knew that true power lay not in the might of the sword, but in the mind that wielded it. "I do not fight for the sake of fighting, Ares," Athena said, "but if you wish to test my skill, I will oblige." Ares grinned, clearly eager for the challenge. The other gods, sensing a spectacle, began to gather around the training grounds, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Athena stepped forward, her spear gleaming in the divine light. She held it with ease, her movements fluid and graceful, as if the weapon was an extension of her own body. Ares, with his muscular frame and fiery temper, brandished his sword, the blade catching the light in a dazzling display. The two gods faced each other, their eyes locked in a silent exchange. Ares, ever the aggressor, made the first move. He charged at Athena with a roar, his sword slicing through the air with deadly intent. But Athena, ever the strategist, moved with precision and speed. She sidestepped his attack with ease, her spear held firmly in her grip as she watched for his next move. Ares, frustrated by her evasion, attacked again, this time with more force. His sword clanged against her shield, but Athena remained steady, her expression unchanging. She did not fight with rage or desperation as Ares did. Instead, she fought with strategy, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Ares lunged forward once more, Athena saw her opening. With a swift, calculated motion, she parried his blow and spun her spear in a wide arc, knocking his sword from his hand. The weapon clattered to the ground, and Ares, caught off guard, stumbled back. Athena did not press the advantage. Instead, she lowered her spear and stepped back, her eyes calm and steady. "You see, Ares," she said, her voice as measured as ever, "strength alone is not enough. It is the mind that wins battles, not the sword." Ares, though clearly frustrated by his defeat, could not argue with her logic. He picked up his sword, his expression a mixture of grudging respect and lingering pride. The other gods, who had been watching in silence, began to murmur among themselves. Athena's victory had not only proven her skill in battle, but had also demonstrated the power of wisdom over brute force. Zeus, watching from his throne, smiled with approval. Athena had once again shown that her role as a goddess was not just to fight, but to think, to strategize, to bring order and reason to the chaos of war. Chapter 8. The foreshadowing of Athena's future. As the years passed, Athena's reputation as both a wise counselor and a fierce warrior grew. She became a central figure in the lives of both gods and mortals, her wisdom sought by all who desired guidance. Yet her story was far from over. Whispers among the gods spoke of future conflicts, of great wars that would test even Athena's wisdom. The Trojan War in particular loomed on the horizon, a conflict that would see Athena play a pivotal role. But for now, Athena stood tall, her gaze fixed on the horizon, knowing that her journey had only just begun. The gods, too, knew that the tale of Athena was but the beginning. More stories, more adventures awaited them in the chapters to come. And as the sun set over Olympus, casting long shadows across the halls of the gods, they knew that the next story would soon unfold. Chapter 1. The Origins of Heracles. Long before the tales of his labors spread across the mortal world, Heracles was known by another name, Alcides, son of Zeus, born to the mortal woman Alcmene. His birth was both a blessing and a curse, for though he was born of divine power, he was destined for a life filled with hardship and struggle. The story of Heracles' birth begins with Zeus's unquenchable desire for greatness. In the depths of Olympus, Zeus had long watched the world of mortals, admiring their resilience, their tenacity, and their will to survive. But in them, he also saw potential to rise beyond their mortal limits and achieve true greatness, if only they had the strength and guidance of a god. It was with this in mind that Zeus descended to earth in the form of Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon. Alcmene, a woman of great beauty and virtue, unknowingly welcomed Zeus into her bed, believing him to be her husband returning from battle. It was through this union that Heracles, or Alcid as he was called at birth, came into the world. From the moment of his birth, Heracles was marked by divine favor, his strength and power evident even in infancy. Hera, however, the wife of Zeus, was far from pleased. Her jealousy, a constant flame that burned within her, was stoked into a raging fire by the knowledge of her husband's infidelity. She harbored a deep and abiding hatred for Heracles, knowing that he was a constant reminder of Zeus's betrayal. Hera's vengeance would follow Heracles throughout his life, beginning even before he could walk. One night, as Alcmene lay with her newborn son, Hera sent 2 serpents into the crib, hoping to strangle the infant in his sleep. But when the serpents coiled around the child's limbs, Heracles did not cry out in fear. Instead, with a strength that belied his tiny form, he grasped the serpents in his hands and squeezed until their lifeless bodies fell limp. Alcmene awoke to the sight of her child, smiling and unafraid, clutching the dead serpents in his hands. It was then that she knew her son was no ordinary mortal. He was a child of Zeus, destined for greatness, but also for unimaginable trials. As Heracles grew, his strength became the stuff of legend. By the time he reached manhood, he had already performed feats that would have secured his place in history. Slaying wild beasts, defending his people from invaders, and performing acts of heroism that earned him the love and admiration of mortals everywhere. Yet Despite his strength and divine lineage, Heracles was not immune to the weaknesses of mortals. His temper, fiery and unpredictable, often led him into trouble, and it was this temper that would ultimately lead to his greatest trial. One day, in a fit of madness sent by Hera, Heracles committed an unspeakable act. In his delirium, he killed his own wife, Megara, and their children, believing them to be enemies sent to destroy him. When the madness passed, Heracles was left with the horror of what he had done, the blood of his family staining his hands. Desperate for redemption, Heracles sought out the Oracle of Delphi, hoping to find a way to atone for his sins. The oracle, her voice echoing with the wisdom of the gods, decreed that Heracles must serve King Eurystheus of Tiryns and perform 10 labors, impossible tasks that would test the very limits of his strength and endurance. Thus began the journey of Heracles, a journey that would take him to the farthest corners of the earth and beyond, a journey that would cement his place as the greatest hero in Greek mythology. Chapter 2. The First Labor, the Nemean Lion. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the hills of Nemea as Heracles set out on his first labor. His task, given to him by the cruel and cowardly King Eurystheus, was to slay the Nemean lion. A monstrous beast, with a hide so thick and impenetrable that no weapon of man could pierce it. The people of Nemea had long lived in fear of the lion, its roars echoing through the mountains, a constant reminder of the death and destruction it brought with it. Many had tried to kill the beast, but all had failed, their weapons shattering against its impenetrable skin. As Heracles approached the lair of the lion, nestled deep within a dark, foreboding cave, he felt a surge of determination. This was no ordinary beast. This was a creature sent by the gods, a test of his strength and his will. But Heracles was no ordinary man. He was the son of Zeus, and he would not be defeated. The entrance to the cave was wide and dark, the air thick with the smell of decay. Bones littered the ground, the remains of those who had fallen prey to the lion. Heracles tightened his grip on his club, his muscles tensing in anticipation. As he ventured deeper into the cave, the darkness swallowed him whole. The sound of his footsteps echoed off the stone walls, the only noise in the oppressive silence. And then, from the shadows, came a low, rumbling growl. The Nemean lion emerged from the darkness, its golden eyes gleaming in the dim light, its massive form dwarfing even Heracles. Its fur, thick and matted, seemed to shimmer with an unnatural sheen, and its jaws, lined with sharp, glistening teeth, snapped open and closed with a menacing snarl. Heracles wasted no time. He swung his club with all his might, aiming for the lion's head, but the blow, which would have felled any other creature, merely bounced off the lion's hide, leaving the beast unharmed. The lion roared in fury, lunging at Heracles with terrifying speed. But Heracles was not easily deterred. He dodged the lion's attack, his mind racing as he considered his next move. His weapons were useless. He had seen that now, but Heracles was nothing if not resourceful. Realizing that brute force alone would not be enough to defeat the lion, Heracles devised a plan. He waited for the beast to charge at him again, and as it did, he grabbed hold of its massive head, his powerful arms wrapping around its neck. The lion thrashed and roared, its claws raking at Heracles' skin, but he held on, tightening his grip until, finally, with one last mighty effort, he snapped the lion's neck. The beast fell to the ground, its body lifeless at Heracles' feet. The son of Zeus stood over the fallen creature, his chest heaving with exertion. But there was no sense of victory in his heart, only a grim determination. This was only the beginning. Taking the lion's hide, Heracles fashioned it into a cloak, draping the impenetrable fur over his shoulders as both armor and trophy. It would serve as a reminder of his first labor and of the many more that lay ahead. Chapter 3. The second labor, the Lernaean Hydra. Heracles' second labor took him to the swampy marshes of Lerna, where another monstrous creature awaited him, the Hydra. This multi-headed serpent, born from the depths of the underworld, was a creature of pure evil, its venomous breath capable of killing a man with a single inhale. But the true danger of the Hydra lay not in its poisonous fangs, but in its regenerative abilities. Each time one of its heads was cut off, two more would grow in its place. As Heracles made his way through the murky swamps, the air thick with the stench of decay, he could hear the hissing of the Hydra in the distance. The creature had made its lair deep within the marshes, its many heads rising and falling like serpents in the water. The Hydra, like the Nemean lion, was a creature of divine origin, sent by Hera to destroy Heracles. But Heracles was undeterred. He had faced monsters before, and he would face them again. This labor would be no different. As he reached the lair of the Hydra, Heracles was greeted by the sight of the creature's many heads, each one snapping and hissing, its eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. The Hydra's massive body, covered in thick scaly skin, writhed and twisted in the water, its many heads moving in perfect unison. Heracles knew that this battle would require more than just brute strength. He had brought with him a torch, the flame flickering in the damp air, and he had enlisted the help of his nephew, Iolaos, who stood by his side, ready to assist in any way he could. With a roar, Heracles charged at the Hydra, his sword slashing through the air as he severed one of the creature's heads. But no sooner had the head fallen to the ground than two more sprouted in its place, their venomous fangs snapping at Heracles with deadly precision. Undeterred, Heracles continued to fight, each strike of his sword cutting through the Hydra's heads, but with every blow the creature grew stronger, its many heads multiplying with terrifying speed. Realizing that he could not defeat the Hydra with his sword alone, Heracles called out to Iolaus, who quickly brought the torch to the severed necks of the Hydra. The flames cauterized the wounds, preventing the heads from regrowing. Together, Heracles and Iolaus worked in perfect harmony, cutting off the Hydra's heads and sealing the wounds with fire. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, but eventually the Hydra lay dead at their feet, its body lifeless and unmoving. Heracles wiped the sweat from his brow, his muscles aching from the effort. The Hydra had been a formidable foe, but once again Heracles had emerged victorious. Chapter 4. The Third Labor. The Ceryneian Hind. The third labor of Heracles was unlike the others. While the Nemean lion and the Lernaean Hydra had been monstrous creatures that posed a direct threat to the people of Greece, the Ceryneian hind was a creature of divine beauty, sacred to the goddess Artemis. The hind was a magnificent creature, its coat gleaming with a golden sheen, its antlers long and graceful, reaching high into the sky. It was said to be so swift that no man could catch it, and so sacred that to harm it would bring the wrath of Artemis herself. Heracles' task was not to slay the hind, but to capture it alive and bring it back to King Eurystheus. But this task was not as simple as it seemed. The hind being a creature of divine origin, was elusive, its speed unmatched by any mortal or immortal. For a full year, Heracles pursued the hind, tracking it through the forests, over mountains, and across rivers. Each time he thought he had caught up to it, the creature would vanish, its swift hooves carrying it far beyond his reach. But Heracles was nothing if not persistent. He followed the hind across the entire land of Greece, his determination never wavering. And finally, after a year of relentless pursuit, he found the hind resting near a stream, its golden coat gleaming in the sunlight. With great care and respect, Heracles approached the creature, his movements slow and deliberate. He knew that he could not simply capture the hind through force. It required finesse, patience, and, most of all, respect for the creature's divine nature. As Heracles reached out to the hind, he whispered a prayer to Artemis, asking for her forgiveness and guidance. The hind, sensing his sincerity, allowed him to place his hands on its golden antlers, and with a gentle pull, Heracles led the creature back to King Eurystheus. The king, ever the coward, had hoped that Heracles would fail in his task, knowing that the wrath of Artemis would surely follow if the hind were harmed. But Heracles, with his wisdom and respect for the gods, had succeeded without incurring the goddess's anger. Artemis, watching from her place in the heavens, smiled down upon Heracles, recognizing his skill and reverence. She allowed him to return the hind to the wild, where it continued to roam, a symbol of beauty, grace, and the harmony between man and nature. Chapter 5. The Fourth Labor, the Erymanthian Boar. For his fourth labor, Heracles was tasked with capturing the Erymanthian boar, a massive and fearsome creature that roamed the snow-capped peaks of Mount Erymanthos. The boar, with its enormous tusks and ferocious temper, had been terrorizing the local villages, destroying crops and homes with its rampages. Heracles set out for the mountains, his breath forming clouds in the cold, thin air. The climb to the summit was treacherous, the rocky path slick with ice and snow, but Heracles was no stranger to hardship, and he pressed on, his determination driving him forward. As he neared the summit, Heracles heard the distant sound of the boar's snorting, a deep, rumbling noise that reverberated through the mountain pass. He tightened his grip on his spear, his muscles tensing in anticipation of the battle to come. When he finally reached the boar's lair, Heracles was greeted by the sight of the massive beast, its tusks gleaming in the pale winter light. The boar, sensing the presence of the hero, let out a deafening roar, its hooves kicking up snow as it charged at Heracles with terrifying speed. But Heracles was ready. With a swift motion, he sidestepped the boar's charge, his spear raised in defense. The boar, enraged by the near miss, turned and charged again, its tusks slashing through the air with deadly intent. Heracles knew that he could not kill the boar. His task was to capture it alive, and so he waited for the perfect moment, his eyes never leaving the boar as it circled him, its breath coming in heavy, ragged bursts. Finally, as the boar charged at him once more, Heracles sprang into action. With a powerful leap, he landed on the boar's back, his arms wrapping around its massive neck. The boar thrashed and bucked, its tusks gouging deep furrows in the snow, but Heracles held on, his grip unyielding. With a mighty effort, Heracles wrestled the boar to the ground, pinning it beneath him. The beast let out a final defeated roar before falling silent, its body heaving with exhaustion. Heracles, breathing heavily from the effort, tied the boar's legs with thick rope, ensuring that the creature could not escape. He then hoisted the massive beast onto his shoulders and began the long trek back to King Eurystheus. When Heracles arrived at the palace, the cowardly king was so terrified by the sight of the boar that he hid inside a large bronze jar, refusing to come out until the creature was taken far away. Heracles, ever dutiful, returned the boar to the wild, where it no longer posed a threat to the villagers. His fourth labor complete, Heracles knew that his journey was far from over. More trials awaited him, each more difficult and dangerous than the last. But Heracles, with his indomitable spirit and unshakable resolve, pressed on, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 6. The Fifth Labor, the Augean Stables. Heracles' fifth labor was unlike any he had faced before. There were no monsters to slay, no beasts to capture. Instead, his task was one of sheer endurance and determination. He was ordered to clean the Augean stables, home to thousands of cattle belonging to King Augeas. The stables had not been cleaned in over 30 years, and the filth had accumulated to such an extent that the task seemed impossible. The stench alone was enough to drive any man away, but Heracles was no ordinary man. Arriving at the stables, Heracles surveyed the scene before him. The vast pens were filled with cattle, their waste piled high in mounds that stretched as far as the eye could see. The ground was thick with mud and dung, and the air was heavy with the smell of decay. King Augeas, who had agreed to reward Heracles with a portion of his herd if he could complete the task in a single day, watched from a distance, confident that the hero would fail. But Heracles, ever resourceful, had a plan. Rather than attempting to shovel the filth by hand, Heracles decided to use the natural landscape to his advantage. Two rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, ran near the stables, and Heracles knew that if he could divert their course, the rushing waters would wash away the filth in a matter of hours. With his immense strength, Heracles redirected the flow of the rivers, sending the waters crashing through the stables. The force of the current swept away the filth, leaving the stables clean and fresh by the end of the day. King Augeas, shocked by Heracles' success, refused to honor his promise, claiming that the hero had used trickery rather than hard labor to complete the task. But Heracles, knowing that he had fulfilled his duty, left the kingdom without protest, his reputation as a hero intact. Chapter 7. The Sixth Labor, the Stymphalian Birds. For his sixth labor, Heracles was sent to the marshes of Stymphalos, where a flock of deadly birds had made their home. These birds, sacred to Ares, had feathers of bronze that they could shoot like arrows, and their beaks were sharp enough to pierce even the strongest armor. The birds had terrorized the people of the region, killing livestock and driving entire villages to abandon their homes. Heracles knew that confronting the birds directly would be a dangerous and potentially fatal mistake. Their numbers were too great, and their deadly feathers could strike from a distance, making it impossible to get close without being overwhelmed. Instead, Heracles devised a plan to drive the birds out of the marshes. He had been given a set of bronze clappers forged by Hephaestus, and he knew that the sound of the clappers would frighten the birds, forcing them into the open where he could deal with them. Arriving at the marshes, Heracles took up his position near the edge of the water, the bronze clappers in his hands. With a mighty crash, he slammed the clappers together, the sound ringing out across the marshes like a thunderclap. The birds, startled by the noise, took to the sky in a frenzy, their wings beating furiously as they fled from their nests. Heracles, seeing his opportunity, drew his bow and fired a volley of arrows into the sky, striking down the birds one by one. The remaining birds, terrified by the sound of the clappers and the deadly accuracy of Heracles' arrows, fled the marshes, never to return. Heracles, his sixth labor complete, returned to King Eurystheus, who once again marveled at the hero's ingenuity and strength. But there were still more labors to come, each one more dangerous than the last. Chapter 8. The Seventh Labor, the Cretan Bull. For his seventh labor, Heracles was sent to the island of Crete to capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent creature that had been terrorizing the island's inhabitants. The bull, with its gleaming white coat and immense size, had been a gift from Poseidon to King Minos. But when Minos failed to sacrifice the bull to the god of the sea, Poseidon cursed the animal, turning it into a rampaging beast. Heracles, ever the dutiful servant, set out for Crete, determined to capture the bull and bring it back to King Eurystheus. When he arrived on the island, he found the bull grazing in a meadow near the shore, its massive form casting a long shadow over the land. The bull, sensing Heracles' approach, let out a deafening bellow and charged at the hero with incredible speed. But Heracles was ready. With a swift motion, he dodged the bull's charge and grabbed hold of its horns, his powerful arms straining against the creature's immense strength. The bull thrashed and bucked, its hooves kicking up dirt as it tried to throw Heracles off, but the hero held firm, his grip unyielding. Slowly, Heracles began to wear the bull down, his muscles rippling with effort as he forced the creature to submit. With one final mighty effort, Heracles wrestled the bull to the ground, tying its legs with thick rope to prevent it from escaping. He then hoisted the massive creature onto his shoulders and carried it back to King Eurystheus. When Heracles arrived at the palace, the sight of the enormous bull struck fear into the heart of Eurystheus, who once again hid inside his bronze jar, too terrified to face the hero and his captured beast. Heracles, ever the dutiful servant, released the bull into the wild, where it no longer posed a threat to the people of Crete. His seventh labor complete, Heracles knew that the most difficult challenges still lay ahead. Chapter 9. The Eighth Labor, the Mares of Diomedes. Heracles' eighth labor took him to the kingdom of Thrace, where the cruel and bloodthirsty King Diomedes kept a herd of wild, flesh-eating mares. These mares, fed on the flesh of men, were savage and uncontrollable, and Diomedes used them to terrorize his enemies and instill fear in his subjects. Heracles' task was to capture the mares and bring them back to King Eurystheus. But this labor would not be as simple as capturing the Cretan bull or the Erymanthian boar. The mares, driven mad by their diet of human flesh, were unpredictable and dangerous, and Heracles knew that he would need to be cautious. Arriving at Diomedes' palace, Heracles wasted no time in confronting the king. With a mighty blow, he struck Diomedes down, ending the tyrant's reign of terror and freeing the people of Thrace from his cruelty. With the king defeated, Heracles turned his attention to the mares, who were kept in a heavily fortified stable near the palace. Using his immense strength, Heracles broke down the doors of the stable and approached the wild mares, his eyes never leaving their snapping jaws and rolling eyes. The mares, sensing the presence of a new master, hesitated for a moment before charging at Heracles, their hooves pounding the ground with deadly force. But Heracles, ever the skilled warrior, dodged their attacks and grabbed hold of the reins, using his strength and skill to bring the wild creatures under control. With the mares subdued, Heracles led them back to King Eurystheus, who, as always, was too frightened to face the hero and his deadly captives. The mares, no longer a threat to the people of Thrace, were released into the wild, where they eventually roamed free, their savage instincts tamed by Heracles' mastery. Chapter 10. The Ninth Labor, the Belt of Hippolyta. Heracles' ninth labor took him to the land of the Amazons, a fierce tribe of warrior women known for their skill in battle and their unwavering loyalty to their queen, Hippolyta. Heracles' task was to retrieve the Belt of Hippolyta, a symbol of her power and authority, and bring it back to King Eurystheus as a gift for his daughter. The journey to the land of the Amazons was long and treacherous, but Heracles was no stranger to hardship. He sailed across the seas, his ship battered by storms and tossed by waves, until he finally arrived on the shores of the Amazon kingdom. Hippolyta, intrigued by the arrival of the famous hero, greeted Heracles with respect and offered him her belt as a gesture of goodwill. But Hera, ever the instigator, could not allow Heracles to succeed so easily. Disguised as one of the Amazons, Hera spread rumors among the warriors that Heracles had come to abduct their queen, and soon the entire tribe was in an uproar. The Amazons, believing their queen to be in danger, attacked Heracles with ferocity, their arrows raining down upon him like a deadly storm. But Heracles, though outnumbered, fought back with all the strength and skill that had made him a legend. In the end, Heracles emerged victorious, the belt of Hippolyta in his possession. The queen, realizing that she had been deceived by Hera's trickery, offered her apologies to Heracles, but the damage had already been done. The hero, weary from the battle, returned to King Eurystheus with the belt, his ninth labor complete. Chapter 11. The 10th labor, the cattle of Geryon. For his 10th labor, Heracles was sent to the farthest reaches of the known world, to the island of Erythea, where the monstrous Geryon, a giant with 3 heads and 3 bodies, kept a herd of magnificent red cattle. Heracles' task was to retrieve the cattle and bring them back to King Eurystheus. The journey to Erythea was long and perilous, taking Heracles across deserts and mountains, through storms and treacherous waters. But the hero was undeterred, his determination driving him ever forward. When he finally arrived on the island, Heracles was confronted by the 2-headed dog Orpheus, who guarded the cattle. With a single blow, Heracles dispatched the beast and continued on to face Geryon himself. Geryon, with his 3 heads and 3 bodies, was a fearsome opponent, wielding 3 swords with deadly precision. But Heracles, ever the skilled warrior, fought with all the strength of his divine lineage, his club and arrows striking with lethal force. After a fierce and bloody battle, Heracles defeated Geryon and claimed the cattle as his prize. He herded the cattle across the land, enduring countless challenges along the way, until he finally delivered them to King Eurystheus. But even as he completed his 10th labor, Heracles knew that his journey was not yet over. The king, ever the schemer, had more tasks in store for the hero. Chapter 12. The 11th labor, the apples of the Hesperides. Heracles' 11th labor was perhaps the most difficult yet. He was tasked with retrieving the golden apples of the Hesperides, which were kept in a garden at the edge of the world, guarded by the fearsome dragon, Ladon, and the Hesperides themselves, the daughters of Atlas. The location of the garden was a closely guarded secret, known only to a select few, and Heracles spent many months wandering the earth in search of clues. Along the way, he encountered numerous challenges, including a battle with the shape-shifting sea god Nereus, who finally revealed the location of the garden. When Heracles arrived at the garden, he found the mighty Atlas, who had been condemned to hold up the heavens for all eternity. Heracles, knowing that he would need Atlas's help to retrieve the apples, offered to take the burden of the heavens for a short time, allowing Atlas to retrieve the apples himself. Atlas, grateful for the brief respite, agreed to the arrangement and brought back the golden apples. But when Atlas returned, he attempted to trick Heracles into holding the heavens permanently. Heracles, ever the clever hero, pretended to agree but asked Atlas to hold the heavens for just a moment while he adjusted his position. As soon as Atlas took the burden once more, Heracles seized the apples and made his escape. With the golden apples in hand, Heracles returned to King Eurystheus, who marveled at the hero's success. But there was still one final labor to be completed. Chapter 13, the 12th labor, the capture of Cerberus. For his 12th and final labor, Heracles was tasked with descending into the underworld to capture Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guarded the gates of Hades. This was a task that no mortal had ever attempted, for the underworld was a place of death and despair, and Cerberus was a creature of pure terror. But Heracles, undaunted by the challenge, set out on his journey. With the help of the gods, he crossed the river Styx and entered the realm of the dead, his presence causing the shades of the underworld to cower in fear. When Heracles reached the gates of Hades, he was confronted by the massive form of Cerberus, its three heads snapping and snarling with ferocity. The beast, with its serpent's tail and razor-sharp teeth, was a terrifying sight. But Heracles was not afraid. With a roar, Heracles charged at Cerberus, his arms wrapping around the creature's necks. The hound thrashed and fought, its powerful jaws snapping at Heracles with deadly force, but the hero held firm, his strength unmatched. After a fierce struggle, Heracles subdued Cerberus, binding the creature with chains and leading it out of the underworld. When he returned to King Eurystheus, the sight of the terrifying beast caused the cowardly king to flee in terror once more, hiding inside his bronze jar. With his 12th labor complete, Heracles had finally redeemed himself, his place among the greatest heroes of Greek mythology secured. Chapter 1. The Power of the King of Gods. Zeus, the ruler of Olympus and the most powerful of all gods, sat upon his golden throne, gazing down at the world of mortals with an expression of quiet contemplation. His throne, crafted from the purest gold and adorned with jewels that shimmered like stars, sat at the highest point of Olympus, allowing him to look out across the entirety of creation. The sky above was clear, the clouds white and soft as they floated across the blue expanse. The sun shone brightly over the world below, and from his perch, Zeus could see the lands of Greece spread out before him, the cities and villages bustling with life. Though he was the ruler of gods and men, Zeus was not a distant or indifferent ruler. He cared for the world he had helped shape, and he watched over mortals with a sense of both pride and responsibility. But there were times when his patience was tested, times when mortals, or even gods, forgot their place and dared to challenge his authority. Zeus's power was unmatched, for he wielded the thunderbolt, the most feared and revered weapon in the cosmos. Crafted by the Cyclops in the depths of Tartarus, the thunderbolt was a symbol of Zeus's divine authority, capable of bringing storms, earthquakes, and destruction with a single strike. It was not a weapon to be used lightly, but when Zeus's wrath was kindled, no force in the universe could stop him. The gods of Olympus were well aware of Zeus's temper, and they took great care to avoid incurring his wrath. Even the most powerful among them, Hera, Poseidon, and Hades, respected Zeus's authority and knew the consequences of defying him. For though Zeus was a just ruler, he was also a god of immense pride, and those who challenged his rule rarely escaped unscathed. The mortals, too, had learned to fear and respect Zeus. They prayed to him for protection and prosperity, offering sacrifices at his temples and invoking his name in times of need. Yet, despite their reverence, there were always those who believed they could defy the will of the gods, those who dared to act with hubris, thinking themselves equal to the divine. It was these acts of defiance, these moments of mortal arrogance, that stirred the wrath of Zeus. For though he could be merciful, he was also the god of justice and retribution, and when his anger was kindled, the consequences were severe. This is the tale of Zeus's wrath, of the moments when his divine anger was unleashed upon the world, bringing destruction and chaos to those who had dared to defy the king of the gods. Chapter 2. The Punishment of Prometheus. One of the most well-known tales of Zeus's wrath is the story of Prometheus, the titan who defied the will of the king of the gods by giving fire to humanity. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, was one of the few titans who had sided with Zeus during the great war between the Olympians and the Titans, known as the Titanomachy. Though Prometheus had once been a trusted ally, his compassion for humanity would ultimately lead to his downfall. After the war, Zeus had divided the world among the gods, assigning each one their respective domains. The mortals who lived on the earth below were left in a state of ignorance, their lives ruled by the whims of nature and fate. Prometheus, who had always had a deep fondness for mankind, watched as the mortals struggled to survive in a harsh and unforgiving world. They lived in darkness, without the knowledge of fire to warm them or light to guide their way. Moved by their plight, Prometheus made a decision that would change the course of history. Against the express will of Zeus, Prometheus stole fire from the heavens and gave it to mankind. The fire brought warmth and light to the mortals, allowing them to cook their food, forge tools, and build cities. It was a gift that would elevate humanity from the darkness, granting them the means to thrive and shape their own destiny. But in doing so, Prometheus had directly defied Zeus's command. The fire was not merely a physical element, it was a symbol of divine power, a force that was meant to remain in the hands of the gods. By giving it to mortals, Prometheus had bridged the gap between gods and men, granting humans a power that Zeus believed they were not ready to wield. When Zeus learned of Prometheus's betrayal, his anger was swift and terrible. The skies darkened with storm clouds, and the rumble of thunder echoed across the heavens as Zeus's rage grew. To defy Zeus was to defy the natural order of the cosmos, and the punishment for such an offense would be severe. Prometheus, knowing that he had incurred the wrath of Zeus, did not flee. He stood by his decision, believing that humanity had the right to better their lives and shape their own fate. But Zeus, blinded by his anger, saw Prometheus's actions as an unforgivable act of rebellion. Summoning his thunderbolt, Zeus called forth his servants, the divine blacksmith Hephaestus and his henchmen, to capture Prometheus. The Titan was bound in unbreakable chains and taken to the remote, desolate peaks of the Caucasus Mountains. There, on a lonely crag, Prometheus was chained to a massive rock, his arms and legs stretched out in eternal torment. But the chains were not the only punishment Zeus had devised. Every day, an enormous eagle, the sacred bird of Zeus would descend from the sky and tear into Prometheus's flesh, devouring his liver. The pain was unimaginable, but the true horror of Prometheus's punishment lay in its repetition. Each night his liver would regenerate, only for the eagle to return the next day and feast upon it again. The torment was endless, a daily reminder of Zeus's wrath and the price of defying the will of the gods. For centuries, Prometheus endured his punishment in silence, never once crying out for mercy. He remained resolute, believing that his actions had been just, even as the pain tore through him day after day. But though Zeus's wrath was great, there was still room for mercy. In time, it was Heracles, the son of Zeus and the greatest of heroes, who would come to Prometheus's aid. As part of his 12 labors, Heracles journeyed to the Caucasus Mountains, and with his great strength broke the chains that bound Prometheus to the rock. Though Zeus had allowed Prometheus's release, the scars of his punishment would remain forever. The tale of Prometheus serves as a warning to all who would defy the gods, for even the most compassionate of actions can incur the wrath of the king of Olympus. Chapter 3. The Flood of Deucalion. Zeus's anger was not limited to the gods and titans who defied him. There were times when mortals themselves, in their arrogance and hubris, provoked the wrath of the king of the gods. One of the most devastating examples of Zeus's anger toward humanity is the story of the Great Flood, which brought destruction to nearly all of mankind. In the early days of the world, when the gods still walked among mortals, the earth was filled with both beauty and chaos. The mortals who had been given fire by Prometheus began to prosper, building cities and civilizations that spread across the land. But with their prosperity came corruption. As the generations passed, the mortals grew arrogant and selfish, turning away from the gods who had given them life. They became cruel and deceitful, waging wars, committing acts of violence, and showing no respect for the natural order of the world. The sacred laws of hospitality, justice, and piety were forgotten, and the earth was stained with blood. Zeus, watching from his throne on Olympus, grew increasingly disgusted by the behavior of mankind. The mortals, who had once been weak and humble, now believed themselves to be above the gods. Their hubris, their belief that they could live without fear of divine retribution, kindled Zeus's wrath. He called a council of the gods, gathering them in the grand hall of Olympus to discuss the fate of humanity. The gods, each seated on their thrones of gold and marble, listened as Zeus spoke of the mortals' wickedness and the need for divine justice. "There is no hope left for mankind," Zeus declared, his voice booming across the hall like the thunder that accompanied him. "They have turned their backs on us, defiling the earth with their greed and cruelty. It is time to cleanse the world and start anew." The gods murmured among themselves, their faces solemn. They knew that when Zeus spoke of cleansing the world, he meant a great and terrible flood, one that would wipe away the corruption of mankind and leave only the pure and righteous to rebuild. But not all the gods agreed with Zeus's harsh judgment. Poseidon, the god of the sea, was eager to unleash the waters of the ocean upon the world, but others, like Athena and Apollo, were hesitant. They believed that there were still mortals who were worthy of saving, those who had remained true to the gods and had lived lives of virtue. Zeus, though unmoved by the arguments of his fellow gods, agreed to show mercy to those who were deserving. He would not wipe out all of humanity, but the vast majority would perish in the flood. leaving only a few righteous souls to repopulate the earth. And so the great flood was unleashed. Zeus sent forth a mighty storm, calling upon the winds and the rain to fall in torrents. The skies darkened and the earth trembled as the waters rose, covering cities, villages, and mountains alike. The rivers overflowed their banks, and the seas swallowed the land, leaving nothing but a vast, endless ocean. Mortals caught in the deluge cried out for mercy, but their pleas went unheard. The floodwaters consumed everything in their path, sweeping away homes, temples, and the very foundations of civilization. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was one couple who had remained faithful to the gods, Deucalion and Pyrrha, the son and daughter-in-law of Prometheus. They had lived lives of piety and virtue, never once turning away from the gods or engaging in the wickedness of their fellow mortals. As the floodwaters rose, Deucalion and Pyrrha were warned by Prometheus of the coming disaster. Following his advice, they built an ark, a great wooden vessel that would carry them safely through the storm. For days and nights they floated upon the endless sea, the rain beating down upon them as the world around them was swallowed by the waters. When the storm finally subsided and the waters began to recede, Deucalion and Pyrrha found themselves alone in a desolate, waterlogged world. The land was barren, the cities and forests gone, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of the waves against their ark. Filled with sorrow for the loss of their fellow mortals, Deucalion and Pyrrha prayed to the gods, asking for guidance on how to rebuild the world. Zeus, moved by their devotion, answered their prayers. He instructed them to cast stones behind them as they walked, and from those stones new men and women would be born. And so Deucalion and Pyrrha followed the will of Zeus, and from the stones they cast, a new generation of mortals arose. These new men and women born from the earth would live in a world cleansed of corruption, a world where the wrath of Zeus would no longer be necessary. The flood of Deucalion serves as a reminder of the consequences of hubris and disobedience to the gods. Though Zeus's anger was fierce, it was tempered by mercy for those who remained true to the divine order. Chapter 4. The Destruction of the Giants. Zeus's wrath was not limited to the mortal world. Even the divine and semi-divine beings who sought to challenge his authority would face his fury. One of the most famous instances of Zeus's anger being unleashed upon the immortal world is the tale of the Gigantomachy, the great war between the Olympian gods and the giants. The giants were the offspring of Gaia, the primordial goddess of the earth, and Uranus, the sky. Born from the blood of Uranus when he was castrated by Cronus, the giants were enormous, powerful beings with great strength and a deep hatred for the Olympian gods. They believed that the gods had usurped their rightful place as rulers of the cosmos, and they sought to overthrow Zeus and his kin. Gaia, angered by the defeat of the Titans in the Titanomachy and the imprisonment of her children in Tartarus, called upon the giants to rise up against the Olympian gods. She promised them victory, claiming that the gods could only be defeated by beings born of both divine and mortal blood. The giants, armed with immense strength and the power of the earth itself, waged war against the gods. They hurled massive boulders and trees at Olympus, shaking the very foundations of the divine realm. The earth trembled with their footsteps, and the sky darkened as the battle raged. But Zeus, the king of the gods, would not be defeated so easily. With his thunderbolt in hand, Zeus led the charge against the giants, hurling bolts of lightning that shattered mountains and scorched the earth. The other gods joined the fray, each wielding their own powers to fight off the colossal foes. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, struck down the giant Enceladus, while Poseidon, the god of the sea, used his trident to bury the giant polyboats beneath the waves. The battle was fierce, but the gods were relentless in their defense of Olympus. Zeus's wrath, kindled by the audacity of the giants to challenge his rule, burned brighter than ever before. With each strike of his thunderbolt, the giants were pushed back, their forces dwindling as the gods pressed forward. But the giants were not easily defeated. Gaia, determined to see her children victorious, called upon the earth itself to aid the giants in their fight. From the depths of the earth, she summoned new giants, stronger and more powerful than before. The gods knew that they could not defeat the giants with their divine power alone. They needed the help of a mortal, one who could wield the strength necessary to bring down the mighty foes. It was Heracles, the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, who answered the call. Armed with his great strength and the bow of Apollo, Heracles joined the battle, his arrows striking true as he brought down giant after giant. With Heracles by their side, the gods gained the upper hand. Zeus, seeing the tide of battle turn in their favor, unleashed the full power of his thunderbolt, sending a wave of destruction across the battlefield. The giants, unable to withstand the combined might of the gods and Heracles, were finally defeated. Zeus's wrath, once kindled, had been satisfied. The giants who had dared to challenge the king of the gods were cast down, their bodies buried beneath the earth, where they would remain for all eternity. The Gigantomachy, like the Titanomachy before it, served as a reminder of the power of Zeus and the consequences of defying his rule. The gods of Olympus, though often seen as distant and aloof, were not to be trifled with, and those who sought to overthrow them would face the full fury of the king of the gods. Chapter 5. The Fall of Ixion. Among the mortals who dared to provoke the wrath of Zeus, none suffered a fate as terrible as that of Ixion, a king whose hubris led him to commit a grievous crime against the gods. The story of Ixion is one of betrayal, arrogance, and divine retribution, and it serves as a stark warning to all who would defy the will of the gods. Ixion was the king of the Lapiths, a proud and ambitious ruler who believed that he could do no wrong. His power and wealth were unmatched, and he considered himself favored by the gods. But Ixion's pride would ultimately lead to his downfall. In a moment of madness, Ixion committed a heinous crime. He murdered his father-in-law, breaking the sacred laws of hospitality that were upheld by the gods. This act of betrayal shocked both mortals and immortals alike, for hospitality was considered one of the most sacred duties in the ancient world. Despite his crime, Zeus took pity on Ixion. The king of the gods believed that Ixion could be redeemed, and so he invited him to dine at the table of the gods on Olympus. It was an unprecedented act of mercy, for no mortal had ever been granted such an honor. But Ixion, blinded by his arrogance, repaid Zeus's mercy with betrayal. While on Olympus, Ixion became infatuated with Hera, the queen of the gods and the wife of Zeus. His desire for her grew, and in his hubris, Ixion believed that he could seduce the queen of the gods. Zeus, ever watchful, saw Ixion's treachery and devised a plan to test him. He created a cloud in the shape of Hera, an illusion so perfect that it was indistinguishable from the real goddess. Ixion, believing the cloud to be Hera, pursued her and committed an unspeakable act. When Zeus revealed the truth of what Ixion had done, his anger was swift and terrible. The skies darkened and thunder rumbled across the heavens as Zeus prepared to deliver his judgment. Ixion, who had already been shown mercy once, would not be spared a second time. Zeus condemned Ixion to an eternal punishment in the depths of Tartarus, the darkest and most desolate part of the underworld. There, Ixion was bound to a flaming, spinning wheel, which would turn forever, causing him unending pain and torment. The wheel, suspended in the void of Tartarus, spun endlessly, its flames scorching Ixion's flesh as he cried out in agony. His punishment was eternal, for there would be no escape from the wrath of Zeus. The tale of Ixion serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of hubris and betrayal. Though Zeus had shown him mercy, Ixion's arrogance led him to believe that he could defy the gods and act without consequence. In the end, his punishment was a reflection of his own sins, an endless cycle of suffering and regret. Chapter 6. The Curse of Sisyphus. Another mortal who dared to defy the will of Zeus was Sisyphus, the cunning king of Corinth. Sisyphus was known for his cleverness and trickery, but his intelligence would ultimately lead him to commit acts that earned him the wrath of the gods. Sisyphus was a man who believed that he could outwit the gods themselves. He was a master of deceit, always scheming and plotting to gain more power and wealth. But his greatest act of defiance came when he attempted to cheat death itself. When Thanatos, the god of death, came to claim Sisyphus, the cunning king devised a plan to avoid his fate. He tricked Thanatos into being bound in chains, rendering the god powerless. With Thanatos imprisoned, no one on earth could die, and chaos soon spread across the land. The gods, realizing that something was amiss, were furious. Hades, the god of the underworld, demanded that Sisyphus be punished for his insolence. Zeus, too, was enraged by Sisyphus's defiance. Death was a natural part of the order of the universe, and by cheating death, Sisyphus had disrupted the balance of life and death. Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger of the gods, to free Thanatos and bring Sisyphus to the underworld. But even in death, Sisyphus's cunning did not wane. Before he died, he instructed his wife to leave his body unburied and perform no funeral rites. When Sisyphus arrived in the underworld, he feigned outrage at his wife's actions, claiming that she had dishonored him by failing to bury him properly. He begged Hades and Persephone to allow him to return to the world of the living, so that he could ensure that the proper rites were performed. The gods, moved by his plea, granted him permission to return to the living world. But Sisyphus had no intention of keeping his promise. Once he was free from the underworld, he refused to return, living out the remainder of his life as though he had escaped death for good. But Sisyphus's defiance would not go unpunished. When he finally did die for the second time, Zeus condemned him to an eternal punishment that would reflect his arrogance and deceit. In the depths of Tartarus, Sisyphus was tasked with pushing a massive boulder up a steep hill. Each time he reached the summit, the boulder would roll back down, forcing him to begin the task again. For all eternity, Sisyphus was trapped in an endless cycle of futile labor, his punishment a reflection of his own arrogance. He had believed that he could outwit the gods, but in the end his cleverness had only led to his downfall. The story of Sisyphus is a powerful reminder that no one, not even the cleverest of mortals, can escape the will of the gods. Zeus's wrath, once kindled, was a force that could not be avoided, and those who defied him would face consequences that echoed throughout eternity. Chapter 7. The Punishment of Tantalus. Tantalus, a king favored by the gods, was another mortal whose actions incurred the wrath of Zeus. Though he had been granted the rare privilege of dining with the gods on Olympus, Tantalus's greed and hubris led him to commit a crime so heinous that his punishment became one of the most infamous in all of Greek mythology. Tantalus, who ruled over the kingdom of Lydia, was beloved by the gods for his charm and hospitality. He was often invited to join them in their feasts on Olympus, where he would dine on ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods. But despite the favor he enjoyed, Tantalus was not content. Driven by greed and a desire to impress the other mortals, Tantalus made the unthinkable decision to steal ambrosia and nectar from the gods and bring it back to his kingdom. He believed that by sharing the divine food with his people, he would elevate himself above all other kings and gain unrivaled power. But theft was not the only crime Tantalus committed. In an act of sheer arrogance and cruelty, Tantalus decided to test the omniscience of the gods by serving them a feast made from the flesh of his own son, Pelops. He wanted to see if the gods would notice the deception, believing that he could trick even the most powerful beings in the universe. When the gods realized what Tantalus had done, their fury was boundless. Zeus, in particular, was enraged by the betrayal and the desecration of the sacred bond between mortals and gods. Tantalus's punishment was swift and eternal. He was cast into Tartarus, where he was condemned to stand in a pool of water beneath a fruit-laden tree. Though the water rose to his chin and the fruit hung just above his head, he could never drink or eat. Each time he bent down to drink, the water receded, and each time he reached for the fruit, the branches lifted out of his grasp. Tantalus's eternal torment, the constant presence of food and drink that he could never consume, became a symbol of the consequences of greed and hubris. The phrase tantalizing, derived from his name, is still used today to describe something that is just out of reach. The tale of Tantalus serves as a stark reminder that those who betray the trust of the gods and act with arrogance will face severe consequences. Even those who are favored by the gods can fall from grace if they allow their greed and pride to overcome them. Chapter 8. The Conclusion of Zeus's Wrath. The tales of Zeus's wrath are numerous and varied, each one a reflection of the complex nature of the king of the gods. Though he was capable of great compassion and mercy, Zeus was also a god of justice and retribution, and those who defied him, whether they were gods, titans, or mortals, would face the full force of his anger. From the torment of Prometheus to the destruction of the giants, from the flood of Deucalion to the eternal punishments of Ixion, Sisyphus, and Tantalus, the stories of Zeus's wrath serve as powerful reminders of the consequences of hubris and defiance. Yet, even in his wrath, there was often a sense of balance. Zeus did not punish without cause, and his anger was always directed at those who had broken the divine order or committed acts of betrayal. His judgments, though severe, were a reflection of his role as the ultimate arbiter of justice. In the end, the tales of Zeus's wrath are not merely stories of punishment and destruction. They are also stories of the importance of respect for the gods, the dangers of arrogance, and the need for balance in all things. For though Zeus's anger could be terrifying, it was always tempered by his wisdom and his understanding of the greater order of the universe. And so, the story of Zeus's wrath comes to an end. But the lessons of these ancient myths continue to resonate through time, reminding us of the power of the gods and the consequences of defying the will of Olympus. Chapter 1. The Prophecy and the Calling of Jason. In the kingdom of Iolcus, a prophecy weighed heavily on the mind of Peleus, the usurper king. The throne he had seized from his half-brother Aeson had brought him power, but it also carried with it a curse, one that foretold his downfall at the hands of a man wearing a single sandal. Peleus, ever watchful of threats to his rule, had imprisoned Aeson in the palace dungeons, keeping a close eye on the line of his half-brother. But Aeson's wife had outwitted him, secretly sending their infant son Jason to be raised in the care of the centaur Chiron in the remote mountains. Under Chiron's guidance, Jason grew into a strong, intelligent, and courageous young man. The centaur taught him not only the skills of combat and survival, but also the values of honor, justice, and compassion. Jason knew of his royal lineage, but he was unaware of the full scope of his destiny until he reached manhood. On the day he turned 20, Jason received a vision. The goddess Hera, who had long despised Peleus for his hubris and disrespect toward the gods, appeared before Jason in a dream. She told him of his true heritage and his rightful claim to the throne of Iolcus. But to reclaim his kingdom, he would need to embark on a dangerous quest, a quest for the legendary Golden Fleece, a powerful symbol of kingship and divine favor. The Golden Fleece, the skin of a magical ram, was said to hang in a sacred grove far to the east in the land of Colchis, guarded by a sleepless dragon. Retrieving the fleece would not only prove Jason's worth, but also bring the favor of the gods to his cause. Awakened by the weight of his destiny, Jason set out from Chiron's mountain cave, determined to reclaim his birthright. As he journeyed toward Iolcus, the prophecy began to unfold. One day, as he crossed a rushing river, Jason lost one of his sandals in the current. Undeterred, he continued on his way, now unknowingly fulfilling the prophecy of the man with one sandal. When Jason arrived in Iolcus, the city was abuzz with the preparations for a grand festival. Peleus, ever watchful, had summoned his advisors and priests to consult the omens, for he had heard rumors of a young man approaching the city who might be the one foretold to bring his doom. As Jason entered the city gates, wearing only one sandal, Peleus's heart froze with fear. The prophecy was coming true. Chapter 2. The Bargain with Peleus. Peleus, though shaken by the appearance of Jason, did not immediately reveal his fear. He greeted the young man with feigned hospitality, inviting him to the palace and inquiring about his journey. Jason, knowing that Peleus had stolen the throne from his father, did not mince words. He declared his identity and his intention to reclaim the throne of Iolcus. Peleus, ever the cunning ruler, masked his anger and fear with a sly smile. He knew that outright denial of Jason's claim might provoke the wrath of the gods, but he also had no intention of giving up the throne without a fight. Instead, he proposed a challenge. "If you wish to prove yourself worthy of this throne," young Jason, Peleus said, "then you must first accomplish a task that no man has ever dared attempt. Retrieve for me the golden fleece which hangs in the sacred grove of Colchis. Bring it to Iolcus, and I will surrender the throne to you." Jason, confident in his strength and the favor of Hera, accepted the challenge without hesitation. He believed that the gods were on his side and that this quest was part of his destiny. Peleus, however, had no intention of honoring his promise. He believed that Jason would never return from such a perilous journey. The land of Colchis was far beyond the known world, guarded by dangerous seas, treacherous mountains, and, most fearsome of all, the dragon that never slept. Jason, unaware of Peleus's treachery, began to assemble a crew for his journey. He knew that the quest would require not only his own strength, but also the skills and bravery of other heroes. Word of Jason's quest spread quickly, and soon the greatest warriors and adventurers of Greece flocked to his side, eager to be part of the legendary journey. Among the crew were some of the most famous heroes of the age: Heracles, the strongest of all mortals; Orpheus, whose music could charm even the gods; Atalanta, the swift-footed huntress; Castor and Pollux, the twin sons of Zeus, and many others. Together they became known as the Argonauts, named after their ship, the Argo, which had been crafted by the master shipwright Argus with the help of the goddess Athena. With his crew assembled, Jason stood at the prow of the Argo, ready to set sail for the distant land of Colchis. His heart was filled with both hope and determination, for he knew that the gods were watching over him. But as the ship sailed into the open sea, Jason could not yet know the dangers that awaited him, or the trials that would test not only his strength, but also his courage and loyalty. Chapter 3. The Trials of the Sea. The journey to Colchis was fraught with danger from the very beginning. As the Argo sailed out of the calm waters of Iolcus and into the open sea, the crew quickly realized that this would be no ordinary voyage. The gods themselves seemed to test the Argonauts, sending fierce storms and treacherous waves to challenge their resolve. Poseidon, the god of the sea, watched with interest as the ship sailed into his domain. Though he had no personal quarrel with Jason, Poseidon took pleasure in testing the strength of mortal sailors. He summoned great waves and swirling currents, threatening to capsize the Argo and drown its crew. But Jason's crew was no ordinary group of mortals. Heracles, with his immense strength, held the mast steady as the ship was tossed about by the waves. Orpheus played his lyre, his music calming the stormy seas and bringing a sense of peace to the crew. The twin brothers, Castor and Pollux, worked together to navigate the ship through the treacherous waters, their divine parentage granting them the favor of the gods. Still, the challenges of the sea were relentless. The Argonauts faced dangers from both nature and mythical creatures. They encountered the sirens, whose enchanting voices lured sailors to their doom. As the ship drew near the rocky island where the sirens sang, many of the crew members felt their minds begin to fog, their thoughts consumed by the desire to follow the haunting melodies to their death. But Orpheus, knowing the power of music, took up his lyre once again. He played a melody so beautiful, so pure, that it drowned out the voices of the sirens. The crew, entranced by Orpheus's music, was able to resist the sirens' call and sail safely past the deadly island. The journey continued, and the Argonauts encountered other mythical challenges. They faced the clashing rocks, a narrow strait where two massive cliffs would smash together, crushing any ship that attempted to pass through. Jason, guided by the goddess Athena, devised a plan. He released a dove to fly between the rocks, watching as the cliffs crashed together. When the rocks parted once again, the Argo sailed through, just barely avoiding being crushed. As they sailed further from the familiar shores of Greece, The crew began to realize the magnitude of their quest. The sea itself seemed endless, and the lands they encountered were strange and hostile. Yet, through it all, Jason remained resolute, for he knew that his destiny lay in retrieving the Golden Fleece. After many weeks at sea, the Argonauts finally caught sight of the distant land of Colchis. The golden glow of the sun reflected off the sea, and the crew's spirits lifted as they approached their destination. But they knew that their greatest challenges still lay ahead, for the land of Colchis was ruled by a powerful king, and the Golden Fleece was guarded by a dragon that never slept. Chapter 4. The Kingdom of Colchis and King Aeetes. The land of Colchis lay before the Argonauts, a wild and untamed place ruled by King Aeetes, a man of great power and cruelty. Aeetes was the son of Helios, the sun god, and his kingdom was rich with treasures and sorcery. But his most prized possession was the Golden Fleece, which hung in a sacred grove, guarded by an enormous dragon. As the Argo sailed into the harbor of Colchis, the crew felt a sense of unease. The land was beautiful, with lush forests and tall mountains, but there was a darkness that seemed to lurk just beneath the surface. The people of Colchis were wary of strangers, and the presence of the dragon in the nearby forest cast a shadow over the kingdom. Jason knew that retrieving the Golden Fleece would not be as simple as asking for it. King Aeetes was known for his cruelty and cunning, and he would not part with the fleece willingly. Jason, however, was determined to succeed. He sent messengers to the palace requesting an audience with the king. When Jason and his companions entered the grand throne room of Aeetes, they were met with an imposing sight. The king sat upon a massive throne of gold, his face stern and unforgiving. His daughter, the sorceress Medea, stood at his side, her eyes cold and calculating. Medea, though young and beautiful, was feared throughout Colchis for her mastery of dark magic, and the Argonauts could feel her gaze weighing upon them as they approached the throne. Aeetes listened in silence as Jason explained his quest and asked for the Golden Fleece. The king's expression remained unreadable as Jason spoke, but when he finished, Aeetes let out a low, mocking laugh. "You come to my kingdom, demanding the greatest treasure in the world," Aeetes said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you truly believe that I would give you the Golden Fleece so easily? No, if you want the fleece, you must first prove yourself worthy." Jason's heart sank, but he remained composed. He had expected a challenge, and he was ready to face whatever trials Aeetes would set before him. The king rose from his throne and gestured toward the window, where the vast fields of Colchis stretched out beneath the palace. "Tomorrow," Aeetes declared, "you will face 3 tasks. If you succeed, I will grant you the Golden Fleece. But if you fail, you and your companions will pay with your lives." Jason nodded, accepting the challenge, though he knew that Aeetes had no intention of letting him succeed. The king was known for setting impossible tasks, designed to kill those who dared to challenge his rule. But Jason had the favor of the gods on his side, and he would not back down. As the Argonauts left the palace to prepare for the trials ahead, they could feel the weight of the kingdom's gaze upon them. Colchis was a land of sorcery and danger, and Jason's success would depend not only on his strength, but also on his ability to outwit the king and his dark magic. Chapter 5. The Trials of Jason. The next morning, as the sun rose over the kingdom of Colchis, Jason stood before the gathered crowd, ready to face the trials set by King Aeetes. The first task was one of strength and courage. Jason was to yoke 2 fire-breathing bulls and plow a field with them. These bulls, gifts from the god Hephaestus, were massive, their breath so hot that it could melt metal. The Argonauts watched with bated breath as Jason approached the bulls. The beasts snorted and pawed the ground, their eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. Jason knew that even the slightest mistake could result in a fiery death, but he remained calm, trusting in the favor of the gods. As Jason stepped forward, he felt a presence at his side. It was Medea, the king's daughter. Her eyes, though cold, held a flicker of something else, curiosity, perhaps even admiration. Without a word, she handed Jason a vial of ointment, instructing him to rub it on his skin. "This will protect you from the flames," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason hesitated for a moment, uncertain of Medea's intentions, but he knew that without some form of protection, he stood no chance against the bulls. He accepted the vial and applied the ointment, feeling a strange warmth spread over his skin. With renewed confidence, Jason approached the bulls and grabbed hold of their fiery horns. The beasts roared in anger, their flames licking at his arms and legs, but the ointment protected him from the heat. Slowly, carefully, Jason yoked the bulls and began to plow the field, his muscles straining as the creatures fought against him. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Jason completed the first task. Aetes, though furious, maintained his composure. He knew that the next trial would be even more difficult. For the second task, Jason was to sow the field he had just plowed with dragon's teeth. These teeth, once planted in the soil, would sprout into an army of warriors, merciless soldiers who would rise from the earth and attack without hesitation. As Jason scattered the dragon's teeth across the field, he knew that he would need more than strength to survive this trial. The earth began to tremble, and from the soil, fully armed warriors emerged, their eyes burning with fury as they charged toward him. But Jason had been warned of this by Medea, who had whispered a crucial piece of advice. Instead of fighting the warriors directly, Jason threw a large stone into the middle of the field. The warriors, unable to distinguish friend from foe, turned on each other, slashing and stabbing until none were left standing. Jason had survived the second trial, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Aetes, however, was seething with rage. He had not expected Jason to survive, and now he faced the possibility of losing the Golden Fleece. But there was still one more trial, one that no man could possibly survive. For the third and final task, Jason was to defeat the sleepless dragon that guarded the Golden Fleece. The dragon, a creature of immense size and strength, had never been defeated, and its loyalty to Aetes was absolute. Its scales were impenetrable, and its breath was filled with poison. As Jason stood before the entrance to the sacred grove where the dragon lay coiled, he knew that brute strength would not be enough to defeat the beast. But once again Medea came to his aid. She handed him a vial of potion, telling him that it would put the dragon to sleep. Jason, knowing that he had little choice, accepted the potion. As he approached the dragon, the creature's massive body uncoiled, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The dragon let out a deafening roar, its fangs dripping with venom as it prepared to strike. But before the dragon could attack, Jason threw the potion into its gaping mouth. The creature recoiled, its movements growing sluggish as the magic of the potion took effect. Within moments, the dragon was asleep, its massive body coiled around the base of the tree where the Golden Fleece hung. With the dragon subdued, Jason climbed the tree and retrieved the golden fleece. Its shimmering golden wool sparkled in the sunlight, and Jason felt a surge of triumph as he held the sacred object in his hands. The trials were complete, and Jason had succeeded where so many had failed. But even as the crowd cheered and the Argonauts celebrated, Jason knew that the hardest part of the journey was yet to come. For King Aeetes had no intention of honoring his promise, and Jason would soon find himself fleeing for his life. Chapter 6. The Escape from Colchis. Jason's victory in the trials had won him the golden fleece, but it had also earned him the wrath of King Aeetes. The king, humiliated and enraged by Jason's success, was determined to kill the Argonauts and reclaim the fleece. That night, as the Argonauts celebrated in their camp, Aeetes gathered his soldiers, preparing to launch a surprise attack. But Medea, who had secretly aided Jason throughout the trials, warned him of her father's treachery. She had fallen in love with Jason, captivated by his bravery and determination. Knowing that her father would stop at nothing to kill him, Medea made a fateful decision. She would betray her family and help Jason escape. Under the cover of darkness, Medea led Jason and the Argonauts to the harbor, where the Argo awaited. The crew hurriedly boarded the ship, their eyes constantly scanning the shoreline for signs of pursuit. Medea, knowing that her father's forces were closing in, used her magic to create a thick fog, shrouding the ship in mist as it sailed away from Colchis. As the Argo slipped into the open sea, the sound of horns and shouting echoed from the shore. Aeetes' soldiers had discovered the Argonauts' escape, and they launched their ships in pursuit. Jason, gripping the golden fleece tightly, watched as the fog began to lift, revealing the enemy ships closing in from behind. The Argonauts rowed with all their strength, but the enemy ships were fast, and it seemed only a matter of time before they would be overtaken. Desperation set in, and Jason turned to Medea, who stood at the stern of the ship, her eyes focused on the horizon. Medea, knowing that they could not outrun her father's fleet, made a terrible decision, one that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She took her younger brother Apsyrtus, who had followed her onto the Argo, and killed him. She then scattered his dismembered body into the sea, knowing that her father would stop to collect the remains of his son. The plan worked. When Aeetes saw the remains of his son floating in the water, he halted his pursuit, consumed by grief and rage. The Argonauts, now free from immediate danger, sailed on, leaving Colchis and its treacherous king behind. But though they had escaped with the golden fleece, Jason knew that the journey was far from over. The gods had not finished testing him, and the path home would be filled with more trials, betrayals, and sacrifices. Chapter 7. The Return to Iolcus. The journey back to Iolcus was no less perilous than the journey to Colchis. The Argonauts faced numerous challenges on their way home, including dangerous seas, vengeful gods, and hostile nations. But through it all, Jason remained focused on his goal, returning the golden fleece to Iolcus and reclaiming his rightful place on the throne. One of the greatest challenges they faced was the wrath of the goddess Hera, who had grown angry at Jason's reliance on Medea's dark magic. Though she had once favored Jason, Hera now saw him as a pawn of Medea, and she sought to punish him for abandoning his own strength and honor. The Argo was caught in a massive storm, its sails torn to shreds as the ship was tossed about by the waves. The crew, exhausted from weeks at sea, struggled to keep the ship afloat. But even in the face of such overwhelming danger, Jason refused to give up. In a desperate plea, Jason prayed to Hera, begging for her forgiveness and guidance. His prayer was answered, and the storm abated, allowing the Argo to sail on. But the goddess's warning was clear. Jason would need to prove his worth without relying on the dark magic of Medea. Finally, after many long months, the Argo sailed into the harbor of Iolcus. Jason, weary but triumphant, disembarked with the golden fleece in hand. The people of Iolcus, who had long awaited his return, gathered in the streets to welcome their hero home. But as Jason approached the palace, he found that not all was as he had hoped. Peleus, who had promised to relinquish the throne, had no intention of keeping his word. Instead, he had grown more paranoid and tyrannical in Jason's absence, ruling the kingdom with an iron fist. Jason, determined to claim his rightful place, confronted Peleus in the throne room. But the usurper king, still fearful of the prophecy, refused to step down. A tense standoff ensued, with Peleus calling for his guards to arrest Jason. But Medea, ever resourceful, had one final trick up her sleeve. Using her magic, she concocted a plan to deceive Peleus. She convinced the king's daughters that she could restore their father's youth by boiling him in a magical potion. Desperate to save their aging father, the daughters followed Medea's instructions, only to realize too late that they had been tricked. Peleus was dead, and Jason's path to the throne was clear. But even as Jason took his place as the rightful king of Iolcus, the shadow of Medea's dark magic loomed over him. Though he had achieved his goal, Jason could not escape the consequences of the choices he had made along the way. Chapter 8. The Price of Power. Jason's triumph in reclaiming the Golden Fleece and taking the throne of Iolcus was short-lived. Though he had achieved his goal, the cost of the journey had been great, and the weight of his decisions began to weigh heavily on him. Medea, who had sacrificed everything for Jason, believed that they would rule together as king and queen. But Jason, feeling the pull of his destiny and the pressure of his newfound power, began to distance himself from her. He sought alliances with other noble families, hoping to strengthen his position as king. When Jason announced his intention to marry the daughter of a powerful nobleman, Medea was devastated. She had betrayed her family, her kingdom, and even her own morality for Jason, and now he was casting her aside. The betrayal cut deep, and Medea's love for Jason turned to bitter hatred. In a fit of rage and sorrow, Medea took revenge on Jason in the most terrible way possible. She killed their 2 children, denying Jason the legacy he had hoped to build. The act was one of pure vengeance, and it shattered Jason's world. Jason, now bereft of his family and haunted by the bloodshed that had followed him throughout his quest, found himself a king in name only. The Golden Fleece, once a symbol of divine favor, now seemed a hollow prize, a reminder of the lives that had been lost and the betrayals that had torn his soul apart. As the years passed, Jason's kingdom faltered. His once great reputation as a hero was overshadowed by the dark legacy of his actions. He had achieved his goal, but at what cost? The gods who had once guided him now seemed distant and silent, leaving Jason to ponder the true price of power and ambition. Chapter 1. The Music of Orpheus. Long before Orpheus became known for his journey into the depths of the underworld, he was celebrated throughout the ancient world for a gift unlike any other, the power of music. His music did not merely entertain. It had the power to move mountains, calm raging rivers, and stir the hearts of both mortals and gods alike. Orpheus was the son of Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, and Oeagrus, a king of Thrace. From the moment of his birth, it was clear that he was destined for greatness. While other children played with wooden toys or learned the art of combat, Orpheus held a small lyre in his hands, his fingers instinctively plucking the strings with such grace that it seemed the very winds stopped to listen. As a child, Orpheus was quiet and contemplative, often retreating to the forests and hills of his homeland, where he could play his music in solitude. He was never lonely, for the birds would gather around him, their wings rustling in time with the rhythm of his melodies. Even the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches swaying in harmony with the notes that floated through the air. By the time Orpheus reached manhood, his music had become legendary. No one could hear his songs without being moved to tears or laughter. His music had the power to heal the sick, calm the fiercest of storms, and even make the gods themselves pause in their eternal tasks to listen. There was something divine about Orpheus's gift, a power that went beyond mortal comprehension. It was said that when he played his lyre, the very fabric of reality would shift, and the boundaries between the mortal world and the divine would blur. His music could reach places that words and actions could not, touching the hearts of all who heard it. Orpheus's fame spread far and wide, and kings and queens from distant lands would invite him to their courts, hoping to experience the magic of his music. Yet, despite the adoration he received, Orpheus remained humble, always retreating to the quiet places of the world where he could be alone with his music. It was in one such place, deep in the heart of a sun-dappled forest, that Orpheus met the love of his life, Eurydice. Chapter 2: The Love of Orpheus and Eurydice. Eurydice was a nymph, a creature of nature whose beauty was as wild and untamed as the forest itself. Her laughter was like the sound of a bubbling brook, and her movements were as graceful as the wind through the trees. She lived in harmony with the animals and plants, and the forest thrived under her care. The day Orpheus first laid eyes on Eurydice was a day unlike any other. He had ventured deep into the woods to find inspiration for a new song, his lyre slung over his shoulder. As he played a soft, haunting melody, the trees seemed to whisper in response, and the birds answered with their own songs. And then, from within the dappled shadows of the forest, Eurydice appeared. Her presence was like a dream. She moved through the trees with such grace that Orpheus almost believed she was a spirit conjured by his music. Her eyes, bright and filled with wonder, met his, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. Orpheus, overcome by the beauty of the nymph, played a new melody, one filled with the emotions that surged within him: joy, wonder, and something deeper, something he had never felt before. The music poured from his heart, and Eurydice, captivated by the sound, approached him with a smile. Neither spoke. There was no need for words, for the music said everything that needed to be said. In that moment, Orpheus and Eurydice were bound together by an invisible thread, a connection that transcended mere mortal love. It was as though the universe itself had conspired to bring them together, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. Their love blossomed in the heart of the forest, where they would spend their days walking among the trees, laughing, talking, and most of all, playing music. Orpheus would play his lyre, and Eurydice would dance, her movements as fluid as the music itself. Together they created a harmony that resonated with the world around them, a symphony of love that filled the forest with life and beauty. The animals, drawn to their joy, would gather around them, and even the flowers seemed to bloom brighter in their presence. The world was in perfect harmony, and for a time it seemed as though nothing could ever disturb their happiness. But as with all things in the mortal world, their love was not destined to last. Chapter 3. The Tragic Death of Eurydice. The day of their wedding dawned bright and clear, the sun casting a golden light over the forest as Orpheus and Eurydice prepared to pledge their love to one another before the gods. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers, and the birds sang their sweetest songs as the couple exchanged vows beneath the canopy of ancient trees. Orpheus's music filled the air, a joyful melody that echoed through the forest, carried on the breeze to every corner of the world. It was a day of celebration, a day that seemed to promise an eternity of happiness for the two lovers. But fate had other plans. As Eurydice wandered through the forest, picking wildflowers to adorn her hair, she was unaware of the danger that stalked her from the shadows. Aristaeus, a shepherd who had long harbored an unrequited love for the nymph, watched her from afar, his heart filled with envy and desire. Driven by his jealousy, Aristaeus approached Eurydice, his intentions dark and dangerous. Eurydice, sensing his presence, tried to flee, but in her haste she stumbled upon a hidden nest of serpents. As she ran, one of the snakes struck, its fangs sinking deep into her ankle. The venom spread quickly through her body, and within moments Eurydice fell to the ground, her life slipping away as the forest around her seemed to darken. Orpheus, sensing that something was wrong, rushed to her side, his heart pounding with fear. When he found her lying among the flowers, her skin pale and cold, his world shattered. With shaking hands, Orpheus cradled Eurydice in his arms, his tears falling onto her lifeless face. He could feel the emptiness in her, the absence of the life and energy that had once filled her being. In that moment, the joy that had once filled his heart was replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. Orpheus's music, once so full of life and love, now turned to a mournful lament. He played his lyre with a grief so profound that the trees wept, and the animals of the forest bowed their heads in sorrow. The very earth seemed to mourn the loss of Eurydice, her beauty and grace now gone from the world. But Orpheus could not accept her death. His love for Eurydice was too great, too powerful to be undone by something as final as death. In his heart, he knew that he could not live without her. And so, in his grief and desperation, Orpheus made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He would descend into the underworld and bring Eurydice back. Chapter 4. The Descent into the Underworld. Orpheus's resolve was unshakable. He would venture into the realm of the dead, a place where no living man was meant to go, and he would plead with the gods of the underworld to return his beloved to him. It was a task that no mortal had ever dared to undertake, but Orpheus's love for Eurydice gave him the strength and courage to face even the most terrifying of challenges. With his lyre slung over his shoulder, Orpheus made his way to the entrance of the underworld, a dark, foreboding cave that led deep into the earth. The air grew colder as he approached, and the light of the sun faded into a shadowy gloom. But Orpheus did not waver. His heart, though heavy with sorrow, was filled with a burning determination. As he entered the cave, the darkness closed in around him, and the world above seemed to fade into a distant memory. The path before him was steep and treacherous, the air thick with the scent of decay and the echo of distant cries. The further he descended, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very walls of the cave were pressing in on him. But Orpheus had one weapon that no mortal had ever brought with them into the underworld, his music. With each step, Orpheus began to play his lyre, the soft, mournful notes echoing through the dark corridors of the underworld. The music was filled with the depth of his love for Eurydice, a love so pure and strong that it seemed to reach beyond the realm of the living and into the hearts of the dead. As Orpheus played, the spirits of the dead who wandered aimlessly through the shadows paused to listen. For the first time since their deaths, they felt something, an emotion, a memory, a spark of the life they had once known. The sound of Orpheus's lyre brought them peace, if only for a moment, and they followed him, drawn to the beauty of his music. Even the river Styx, the boundary between the world of the living and the dead, seemed to calm in the presence of Orpheus's song. Charon, the ferryman who guided the souls of the dead across the river, listened in awe as Orpheus approached. Without a word, Charon allowed Orpheus to board his boat, his gnarled hands steadying the vessel as they crossed the dark waters. The journey was silent, save for the haunting melody of Orpheus's lyre, which seemed to soothe even the turbulent waves of the Styx. On the other side of the river, Orpheus faced the final guardian of the underworld, Cerberus, the three-headed hound who guarded the gates of Hades. The beast, with its snarling jaws and piercing eyes, was a fearsome sight, its massive form blocking the path to the realm of the dead. But Orpheus did not fear the beast. Instead, he played a new melody, one filled with gentleness and calm. The notes of his lyre floated through the air like a lullaby, soft and soothing. Cerberus, who had never known such kindness, listened with all three heads, his growls fading into silence. Slowly the beast lay down, its massive paws resting on the ground as it closed its eyes, lulled into a deep sleep by the beauty of Orpheus's music. With Cerberus now at rest, Orpheus continued his journey, passing through the gates of Hades and into the heart of the underworld. Chapter 5. The Court of Hades and Persephone. The underworld was a place unlike any Orpheus had ever seen. It was a realm of shadows and whispers, where the souls of the dead wandered aimlessly, their eyes hollow and empty. The air was thick with sorrow, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with the weight of countless lives lost. But Orpheus's heart was not swayed by the despair that surrounded him. He played his lyre as he walked, the music a beacon of light in the darkness, guiding him toward his ultimate goal, the palace of Hades and Persephone. The palace of the underworld was a vast, towering structure, its walls carved from black stone that seemed to absorb all light. Great iron gates guarded the entrance, and behind them, the throne room of the king and queen of the dead awaited. Orpheus approached the gates with trepidation, but he did not falter. He knew that this was his only chance to bring Eurydice back, and he would not let fear stop him. As he played his lyre, the iron gates slowly creaked open, as if the very stones of the underworld were moved by the power of his music. Orpheus stepped through the gates and into the throne room, his heart pounding in his chest. Hades, the stern and unyielding ruler of the dead, sat upon his throne, his dark eyes watching Orpheus with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his very soul. At his side sat Persephone, the queen of the underworld, her beauty cold and distant, like a winter's night. For a moment, there was silence. The spirits of the dead gathered around the edges of the room, their hollow eyes fixed on Orpheus as he stood before the thrones of the gods. And then Orpheus began to play. The music that flowed from his lyre was unlike anything he had ever played before. It was filled with the depth of his sorrow, the intensity of his love, and the desperation that consumed him. Every note carried with it the weight of his journey, the trials he had faced, and the grief that had driven him to this point. He sang of Eurydice, of her beauty, her grace, and the love they had shared. He sang of their life together, the joy they had known, and the terrible tragedy that had torn them apart. His voice, filled with emotion, echoed through the throne room, and even the spirits of the dead seemed to weep at the sound. As Orpheus played, Hades and Persephone listened in silence. The god of the underworld, known for his cold and merciless nature, felt something stir within him, a pang of empathy, a flicker of understanding. Persephone, too, was moved by the music, her eyes softening as she listened to the tale of love and loss. When Orpheus finished his song, there was a long, heavy silence. The music lingered in the air, its echoes fading into the shadows. Hades, his voice deep and resonant, finally spoke. "Orpheus," he said, "your music has touched even the cold heart of the underworld. Never before has a mortal dared to come before me with such a plea, and never before have I been moved to grant such a request." Persephone, her voice soft and melodic, leaned forward on her throne. "Your love for Eurydice is true and pure, and for that, we will grant you this one chance. You may take her back with you to the world of the living, but there is one condition." Orpheus's heart leapt in his chest, but he remained silent, listening to the queen's words. "You may lead Eurydice out of the underworld," Persephone continued, "but you must not look back at her until you have both reached the surface. If you do, she will be lost to you forever." Orpheus nodded, his resolve unshaken. He would do whatever it took to bring Eurydice back, even if it meant resisting the urge to look at her until they were free. Hades raised his hand, and from the shadows Eurydice appeared, her form ghostly and pale, but still as beautiful as Orpheus remembered. She stepped forward, her eyes filled with love and longing, as she reached for Orpheus. Without a word, Orpheus took her hand, the warmth of her touch filling him with hope. And so, with Eurydice at his side, Orpheus began the long journey back to the world of the living. Chapter 6. The Journey Back. The path back to the surface was long and treacherous, the darkness of the underworld pressing in on all sides. Orpheus led the way, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Eurydice followed behind him, her footsteps silent as a whisper, her presence like a shadow in the darkness. Orpheus could feel her there just behind him, her hand barely brushing against his. The urge to look back, to see her face, to know that she was truly with him, grew stronger with each passing moment. But he resisted, reminding himself of the promise he had made. He could not look back, not yet. As they climbed the steep path, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to close in around them. Orpheus played his lyre softly, the music a guiding light in the oppressive gloom. The spirits of the dead who had once followed him in silence now reached out with ghostly hands, their hollow eyes filled with longing. But Orpheus ignored them, his focus entirely on the path ahead. With each step, the weight of the underworld seemed to grow heavier. pressing down on Orpheus like a physical force. His breath came in short, labored gasps, and his legs ached from the strain of the climb. But still he pressed on, knowing that Eurydice was depending on him. Time seemed to stretch and bend in the underworld, and Orpheus had no way of knowing how long they had been walking. Hours? Days? It felt like an eternity. The oppressive silence, broken only by the soft notes of his lyre, weighed heavily on his mind, and the temptation to look back became almost unbearable. He wanted nothing more than to see Eurydice's face, to know that she was truly there, to hold her in his arms and never let go. But he knew that one glance, one mistake, would undo everything. The path grew steeper, the air colder. Orpheus's heart raced as they neared the entrance to the underworld, the faint light of the surface just visible in the distance. His hands shook as he clutched his lyre, his mind filled with a whirlwind of emotions: hope, fear, love, and doubt. And then, just as they reached the threshold of the underworld, a terrible thought entered Orpheus's mind. What if Eurydice wasn't really there? What if Hades had tricked him, and the figure following him was nothing more than a shadow, a ghost, a cruel illusion? The doubt gnawed at him, growing stronger with each passing second. His steps faltered, and he felt his resolve begin to crumble. He couldn't take it any longer. With a single, swift motion, Orpheus turned around, his heart pounding in his chest as his eyes locked onto Eurydice's. For a brief moment, everything was perfect. Eurydice stood before him, her eyes filled with love and sorrow, her hand reaching out to touch his. But then, just as quickly, the light in her eyes faded, and her form began to dissolve into the shadows. "No!" Orpheus cried, his voice filled with anguish as he reached for her. But it was too late. Eurydice was gone, pulled back into the depths of the underworld, lost to him forever. Chapter 7. The Return to the World of the Living. Orpheus stood at the entrance to the underworld, his heart shattered, his soul consumed by grief. The light of the surface world was just inches away, but it no longer mattered. Eurydice was gone. He had failed. The world above, once so full of life and color, now seemed cold and empty. The sun, which had once filled him with warmth and joy, now cast long, empty shadows over the land. The birds, which had once sung in harmony with his music, now fell silent. Orpheus wandered the earth in a daze, his lyre hanging limply at his side. His music, once so full of love and life, was now a mournful dirge, a lament for the love he had lost. The melodies that once brought joy to those who heard them now carried the weight of his sorrow, and even the gods wept at the sound. No matter where Orpheus went, he could not escape the pain of his loss. The memory of Eurydice haunted him, her face always just out of reach, her voice a distant echo in his mind. He longed to return to the underworld, to plead with Hades once more, but he knew that the gods would not grant him a second chance. In his grief, Orpheus turned away from the world of men. He wandered alone through forests and mountains, seeking solace in the solitude of nature. But even the beauty of the natural world, which had once brought him peace, could not ease the pain in his heart. As the years passed, Orpheus became a shadow of his former self. His music, once so powerful and moving, was now a reflection of his own despair. The world around him grew colder, and the joy he had once known seemed like a distant memory. Yet even in his sorrow, Orpheus's music continued to touch the hearts of those who heard it. His songs of love and loss resonated with the world, and his story became a legend, passed down through the generations as a reminder of the power of love and the pain of loss. Chapter 8. The Legacy of Orpheus. Though Orpheus never recovered from the loss of Eurydice, his legacy lived on. His music, a testament to the depth of his love and the tragedy of his loss, became a source of inspiration for generations to come. The gods themselves, moved by the beauty of Orpheus's music, placed his lyre among the stars where it could shine for all eternity. The constellation of Lyra, a symbol of Orpheus's undying love for Eurydice, now glows brightly in the night sky, a reminder of the power of music and the enduring nature of love. And though Orpheus's story ended in tragedy, his tale continues to be told, not as a cautionary tale, but as a celebration of the beauty and pain of love. His journey into the underworld, his desperate attempt to defy death itself, and the heartbreaking moment when he lost Eurydice forever, have become a part of the very fabric of myth and legend. The tale of Orpheus and Eurydice, though tragic, is ultimately a story of love's ability to transcend even the boundaries of life and death. And though Orpheus was unable to bring Eurydice back from the underworld, his love for her never faded. It lives on in his music, in the stars, and in the hearts of all who hear his story.